I just said, prepare yourself to make a living. And whatever you want to do, go for it.
Well, I like to point out, and this is important to me, of all 5 kids, nobody wanted to be a journalist, you know? Nobody asked us what they should be. They decide themselves what they should be, you know? Where they want to go to college. I should say that all 5 are products of the Nashville Public School System.
Yes, I'm André Churchwell. I'm a 1975 graduate of the Vanderbilt School of Engineering and currently on the faculty here at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine as a professor of medicine and cardiology, but dean of diversity for the medical school and chief diversity officer for the medical center. We're in a great, interesting time here for Vanderbilt. This is 2016. This is the 50th anniversary of Perry Wallace entering Vanderbilt University as a freshman. Perry integrated the Southeastern Conference sports complex as the first African-American athlete. Oddly enough, the same time, Vanderbilt Medical School was being integrated by Levi Watkins Jr., the first African-American to enter Vanderbilt School of Medicine. So these important transformative figures landed on the Vanderbilt campus at the same time and actually knew each other. Perry's from North Nashville and I'm from East Nashville. I entered Vanderbilt in 1971. That's 5 years after Perry entered. But what's important, it could be a whole different time frame because when Perry entered Vanderbilt, Nashville was fully segregated. By the time I came to Vanderbilt, the Nashville school system had been integrated. In most of Nashville, there was generally one African-American school that all the students attended, from elementary school through high school. And that was different for white Nashville. They had elementary schools, they had middle schools, and they had high schools. And so their campuses were more fortified, more resourced. We were separate, certainly not equal, but we were in schools that, I guess to some extent, those schools, those segregated, were repositories of support. I think one of the challenges we had is that every day we'd come out of Mays, we could see East High off in the distance, and it was not that far. And we could see this large building looming over there, wondering what were they doing there. I would walk down the street there and eventually get to Mansfield and Meridian and eventually to North 9th. That was segregated Nashville. That was all black East Nashville. There was a demilitarized zone or a demarcation between black and East Nashville that were pretty much embodied in 2 streets. One was McFerrin, and then there was Main Street, which clearly was the major demarcation line. We always noticed the streets were wider to some extent. Some of the streets looked like boulevards. Many of our streets were converted alleys. Rather than actually upgrading those alleys to full streets, they just covered the alleys with asphalt. It let us know that there was differences in terms of how Nashville at that time resourced the black parts of its neighborhoods. But even, I think, more interesting about those times was that you had African-American teachers who, because of their skin color, were unable to move into other jobs in the public sector, such as in corporate Nashville or corporate America. We were very much able to garner great training and be stimulated by these young, gifted-minded African-American teachers, both male and female. When we were then integrated in 1970, I was at that time moving on to my junior year in high school. And along with the challenge of walking those streets, which I did, and we had fairly good success. We had a few instances of people maybe yelling or saying inappropriate things to us as we walked through the neighborhood, though there was always a little nervousness as we crossed McFerrin. But we, in general, were not accosted physically. When we got to East High, there was initially some conflicts, some sit-ins, no fights, but clearly there was segregation within the school. Teachers there, we were concerned whether or not they were going to be fair. And in fact, in the majority of the teachers were fair. To be honest with you, I would not have been as successful if it wasn't for the great interest that the white teachers who were there that had in the black students. Mrs. Eulalia Cobb was my chemistry teacher, and she supported me and let me know that I was doing well and was quite competitive, as was Richard Hooper, the math teacher. And the counselors there encouraged me to apply to Vanderbilt. And so I thought, well, why not? Coming here to Vanderbilt, it was like Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. I was a small group of kids, African-American kids, that were accepted here on the campus, and only a handful of us were accepted into the engineering school. Met a number of great teachers here, Paul King, Richard Chavy, John Bourne, who were my models and mentors. I was a little bit dismayed I couldn't stay on campus. Turned out that was probably a good thing, because a lot of the kids, the African-American kids, had challenges here living on campus, and I didn't face that, though I had the challenge of running across campus to catch the bus to get home. But for me, probably was the best thing because of the shelter, support, nurturing environment that home had. Well, we're now on 707 North 9th Street here in Nashville, Tennessee. This is my home. This is where I was raised. But this was a great place, and my mom and dad created this home about 1958. They were married in 51, and Dad was from Clifton, Tennessee, and came to Nashville around about 1920 or so. And my dad's oldest brother, Ross Churchwell, was really the catalyst in the family for education, along with my dad's mom. Dad was very much stimulated by his older brother, and he became interested in the life of the mine, reading, studying, and then finished Pearl High, and here comes World War II. And he was drafted in 1942 and stayed in the Army till 1945. So September 2nd, 1945, when we had armistice, and the war ended, Dad came home, and thank God the GI Bill allowed him to go to Fisk University. And he finished Fisk, I think, in 1949. And around about that time, he ran into a young, attractive Tennessee State freshman named Mary Churchwell, who was from Bell Buckle, Tennessee. And Mom was running, I think, behind a soda fountain. She was a soda fountain jerk, is what they called them. The people who ran the soda fountain, making the sundaes and the ice cream. And apparently the story is Dad saw her and frequented that soda shop a lot, and until he convinced her that they should date, and then subsequently they were married in, I think, 1951.
As far as doing personal things for ourselves, it was just really around the children. And we carried them to church. They went to Sunday school. They knew that we wanted them to be good boys and girls. It's always stressed that, getting an education is important, and they enjoyed going to school. They respected us highly, and we had good children.
And we were growing up, this being Black East Nashville, it was not that developed. That street was a dead end. And we created baseball fields down there and football field. There was a basketball court we put up, and so it was a place for sports, engaging my buddies in the neighborhood. But I guess the one thing that was very clear was the dominant hand Dad had about having you understand discipline. So during the school days, very little. We played maybe till 5 or 6 o'clock, and that was it. You had to come in and eat dinner and do your lesson. He always would say, and I remember vividly in this room or in the kitchen, because I was very much interested in playing basketball or football, and I played a lot of street ball and intramural sports. And he said, you're very good. I've watched it, but I want to let you know you're going to have a harder time getting in the NBA than getting into Harvard Med School. That's what he would tell me, and he was right. When Dad was finishing Fisk, the opportunity to work for the Nashville Banner came along. Dad worked for the Banner from 1950 or 51 to 1981. While he was there, he covered everything. Initially, African-American news, they called it Negro news.
No business, no sports. This is progressive Negro news, just Negro news. Now this would appear all through the paper. Not like they had been publishing what they call a slip page of Negro news on Wednesday. Happenings among colored people, that's what they called it. The slip page wouldn't go to the white community.
And then as time evolved, he became the education editor and covered all the colleges and all the news stories. His early beginnings, they were quite tough. He wasn't allowed to work in the city room.
It was 5 years, the first 5 years I went to the Banner. My office was my home, front room of my father's home. The Banner didn't pay telephone bill. They didn't furnish a typewriter. They didn't furnish car fare. I had to do everything out of that $35.
The 1960s, we were living here, and it was quite turbulent in Nashville. The great book by David Halberstam, The Children, outlines the challenges Nashville was facing with the civil rights movement. We had home burnings and crosses burned in people's yards, ministers' yards here, the students being beaten and pulled off the Woolworth counters. That was all very much in the news. And Dad, being a newspaper reporter, was covering it, but we're covering under duress.
When I wrote my stories, well, I said, with all the mass meetings, wrote the story, filed the story every morning. I guess the photographer filed his photos too. None of that stuff ever got in the paper. Stallman wouldn't let the Banner cover the protest downtown. He didn't want nothing in the paper about the protest, and none of my mass meeting story got in the paper. He was vehemently against desegregating Nashville any way at all.
And he was the first African-American to write on a daily paper in the Southeast. So you're counting Charlotte, you're counting Atlanta. There's one guy out there trying to cover this in a challenged environment, was able to persist on and get some stories about this stuff published. I might add, though, because he worked on this paper, he caught some heat from leaders in Black Nashville, African-American Nashville, because they're saying, why are you working for this paper that doesn't want to cover African-American news or doesn't want to put it in the right light? And Dad's comment was that someone has to be there. Someone has to step, into this world that is contentious and problematic and try to, create a path where he can have stories written that in some way imbue, shape, or talk about what's going on in the Black community. And over time, with his persistence, he was able to finally get these stories in the paper. Dad passed away in 2009 at the age of 92, a very full life. That year, the National Society of Professional Journalists awarded him posthumously their highest award, the Helen Thomas Lifetime Achievement Award. So I think, this guy was a giant. I said heroic, maybe he's more of a giant, both in the sense of civil rights, of what he had to deal with, and the lessons he afforded us. He believed in the life of the mind. He believed that reading, education, art, poetry, music, in the fullest expression, whether it be jazz, symphonic music, would be ways to remain sane and also create a learned mind, a mind that could then embrace all kinds of challenges. One of the things you see as a father, my kids are millennials, so they were born in the 80s, and so they went to University School of Nashville here, which is an integrated school from grade kindergarten through. And so if you watch the kids in those classes, you get a sense that race essentially and color melts away because they've been together since they were age 5. And you look at Dre, my son Dre Jr., and my daughter, and their closest friends are East Indian, African American, Irish American, Scotch American. They don't see race and color in the same way that we have, and so that, I think, that gives us hope for the coming generations. But I think more importantly, what it does, it outlines, as others have, the power of diversity. To have a team or a group of people from different backgrounds who can bring their unique community and family perspectives to look at problems in a way that would be totally different than if it was just one group of people from one part of town, from one school. Diversity makes us better. Diversity prepares us for the 21st century. Tom Friedman told us the world was flat in his book, and he's right. Social media and the media alone has really made it such that you can connect with anybody, anytime, in any part of the globe. And if we sit back with a early 1960s mentality, we have to learn from those lessons. That's why it's important to go backwards, because we know sitting back, looking at a homogeneous mindset or a group of people from the same background leading research or leading our universities or our colleges or our institutions of learning or our corporate world, we can't be successful if we take that vantage. We take that old distant vantage. We have to be more inclusive. We have to have women involved in leadership. We have to have African American and broaden that tent to include LGBT, broaden that tent to include people with disabilities and veterans. And we'll be broadening the tent more and more and more because we know it makes us better. We know from the work of Scott Page and other great researchers that if you have diverse teams and you empower them, they're going to be able to come up with ideas and innovate much better than teams that aren't diverse. And so we have to have diversity in the most deep way, and inclusion, which is harder than diversity. Inclusion means you're intentionally making certain that people of different backgrounds are sitting on committees, are sitting on research councils, are involved in the admissions process. That's the intentionality, and we're very much involved in that here at Vanderbilt, and I'm very proud of that.